Welcome to the X Factor podcast. I'm your host, Charles Epstein. Today I'm joined by Patrick Sullivan, VP of Strategy and Innovation at A-LIGN. That's A-LIGN, as Patrick mentioned to me. That's a silent G and a silent dash.
Both.
A, a leading provider of cybersecurity and compliance solutions. Patrick has over 25 years of experience in the IT security and compliance industry. He has been a TEDx speaker. He is a member of the Forbes Technology Council, and he is an AI ethicist. And Patrick joins us today from Knoxville, Tennessee. Hey, Patrick.
Charles, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, super great.
Oh, I
Yeah.
you know, you are a very, very, very busy man. We had a conversation several weeks ago, and I've been trying to track you down ever since. So we're going to make the best of the time I have with you. I
Yes.
appreciate this, Patrick.
Oh, of course, of course. And your tracking skills are unparalleled for what it's worth, Charles.
Unparalleled.
Unparalleled. Should you
Well
decide
then,
bounty hunting is a career,
well,
you'd be successful.
thank you. As a guy, now you were born and bred down Tennessee?
Uh, My accent, I think, in many ways gives it away, but yes, yes.
Okay, so when you compliment me for my tracking skills, being that you're born and bred in Tennessee, that sounds like it means something.
So either good or bad. I'll leave judgment to the listeners.
Yes, but
Yes.
no, I'm glad we've had a chance. So, I understand Knoxville. I had a conversation. Somebody who was on the podcast previously who lived right outside of Dollywood. My understanding is Knoxville is sort of a stone's throw. No?
Well, 45 minutes or less. It's just over the hill, as we say in East Tennessee. So very, very close. Yeah,
Okay.
Dolly.
Do you make that a regular visit, or?
I've got three children, 8, 10, and 12. And so they very much love the parks. And I will say, not to plug Dolly, but that woman is a national treasure. She
She is.
has done so much for the community, not just in Upper East Tennessee, but globally. But yes, take the kids as frequently as we can. I mean, it really is a lovely time.
Yeah, I've not been. I really should when I'm up that way. So when you and I spoke several weeks ago to prepare for this, we got into a conversation about quote unquote systems thinking, particularly how AI needs to be thought of in a broader social context in which everything is connected. Change one thing and everything is affected. Why don't you take us through that thinking a little bit? I really want to focus our conversation around that. That's a really interesting thought process.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, from a high level, and many of your listeners have probably read Peter Singe's work, The Fifth Discipline, and so that largely drives my perspective on systems thinking. Though there are, of course, separate camps that subscribe to the philosophy, but ultimately the idea is in incredibly complex environments that produce a consistent outcome, we form what's referred to as a system. And in systems, we'll see some common properties that we can identify. And because we can identify them, we can then work with those properties. But one big example is that we cannot change a single component in the system without affecting every other component in the system. That is, in some instances, the distance between cause and effect, stimulus and response are too great, or there's too great a time horizon to directly witness the change, but we know that the change will happen. We see that systems resist change in many ways. And I think this is something that many of your listeners, and Charles, even you and I have experienced instances where we continue to show up to participate in a particular system, as frustrating as it may be, and as much effort as we put into changing whatever that system is, whether it's your job, whether it's a relationship, we see that the system really resists change. And so we take on new behaviors in order to perform in the system. And so when we think about AI, artificial intelligence, it is widely accepted. It's known that AI is more than a technical platform or a technical system. It's a socio-technical system. It's this combination, this marriage, this melding between the humans that are creating and using AI and the technology that delivers the AI itself. And so what we have is an opportunity to bring systems thinking to bear as it relates to really affecting a positive change for humanity as technologies continue to emerge.
So, how does this directly relate to an organization and the major stakeholders in an organization? How do they need to start looking at this within this context of the systems?
So within context of a system inside your organization, we widely accept that there are generally three domains of operations: people, process, technology. Systems thinking tells us, well, there's one more significant domain that we have to consider, and that's the organization itself. So suddenly inside our company, inside your organizations, you have the organization, you have your people, your process, your technology. Systems thinking tells us between those domains, there are dynamic interconnects that get stretched each time we make a change to any one of those elements. As an example, people, process, technology. The connection between our people and technology is what's referred to as human interaction. What we'll see is that when we wholesale change a technology in our organization, and for those business leaders, those technology officers that are doing this, you've experienced this. As you change technology, what you'll see is that you necessarily stress the people that are engaging with that technology. As we think about process, a change to technology necessarily changes the processes that need to be employed to create the outcomes that we're looking for, which also stresses the people. And so suddenly we see very, very clearly, Charles, that a change at the org level, a change at the tech level, the process level, the people level, all those things interact and influence what has to be done at every other stage in the system for us to continue to producing the results that we're looking for.
So how would you go to an organization and get this process started? You bring people in a room. Walk me through how you implement this in a typical organization. Because again,
The,
philosophically, it makes perfect sense. I think just about anybody listening to this who has had any experience with AI know it is at least an order of magnitude different from any other technology that's come down the pike.
yes, yeah. And Charles, honestly, in my opinion, the best approach to talking through change isn't from a systems perspective. That systems perspective helps us see, helps us understand what we need to consider as we are approaching the change that we're bringing into our organization. But there's a company named ProSci that has done years and years of research around structured change, around enterprise change, around real change management. And ProSci has developed a methodology they call ADKAR. So we have to have an awareness, a desire, a knowledge, ability, and then reinforcement. So it's this iterative loop. And so as you think about really bringing awareness of the need for structured change to bear inside an organization, regardless of the size, the first thing that you have to start with is bringing an awareness to your people. Because we know, what's the saying, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. People have to know what it is that's changing, and we have to cultivate and really build a desire within the individuals inside the system if the system is going to progress or make changes moving forward. After the users, the individuals have a desire about the changes that are coming, a willingness to accept the changes that are coming is probably the better way to put that. We have to give them the knowledge and the ability of what it is that will change in their environments so that they can be successful, and then have an iterative loop of continuing to look back, continuing to revisit and ensure that the change that we have intended to implement, intended to force on the system, is actually being accepted by the system and making the difference that we hope that it makes. The beauty of systems thinking, and Charles, I'm sorry I cut you off, but the beauty of systems thinking is it tells us where we should expect stressors, where we should expect real conflict, fire, friction in the environment as we're educating our people about the change that's coming and preparing them to be successful.
Does this require a certain type of person? Because we are talking about a very different dynamic at the workplace. It's one where change is sort of an ever-present thing, and you have
Yes.
to adapt. You're going to have to change at the pace, perhaps even faster to get out in front of this. So I would imagine that it also requires a certain type of person. And in the lead up to this conversation, you and I talked about two very different types of persons. Somebody having a growth mindset
Yes.
and something else. Is that also kind of determinative how somebody will be successful in this new environment?
So yes, and the big and here is once we recognize that mindset, and for listeners, we were discussing Carol Dweck's work, growth mindset, where an individual's can have a growth centered mindset or a fixed mindset. And Charles, to your point, what we'll see is that those individuals in an organization that have a growth mindset tend to be more receptive and adaptive to change. They tend to less seize and freeze, like we'll see with our fixed mindset individuals. But ultimately, it's those fixed mindset individuals through the ADKAR process, particularly awareness and desire, that we have to fire for them. We have to help them answer for themselves two questions. Can I do it, and will it be worth it? In the presence of an affirmative answer to both of those questions, we can really affect almost any change that needs to be affected inside an organization.
So I guess, can you, I'm assuming to the extent that individuals can be characterized in
Yes,
that way, fixed as opposed to growth, organizations also an organizational culture, I'm
without
assuming
question.
move anywhere across that continuum. Can you move a company or an individual who has a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, or is that so deeply embedded?
Well, so you can provide a mechanism for that person to help themselves change, but I wholeheartedly believe that we cannot force external change on individuals. That internal locus of control is so strong that people have to make the determination for themselves that they can, in fact, think and act differently. It's interesting that you mentioned culture. As we do think about the systems view inside our organizations, that dynamic relationship between people in the organization is referred to as culture. And so we'll see instances where that relationship can be very positive and very strong. Those are
Right.
the cases wherein we just think that there's a great culture at this company. We also see instances where that relationship can be bound and framed in distrust. And that's where we see toxic relationships. That's where we see the individuals inside the organization really resisting change, not because technically it's not possible, but because there isn't a high level trust in the organization itself.
How does your role as an AI ethicist intersect with this?
Oh my goodness. So, Charles, I would say, goodness, I would say it's hard to say, if that makes sense. Yeah, well, what we see today is this umbrella.
Well, you know what, maybe we should take a step back and
Please.
define what you mean by AI ethicist.
Yes. So, as an AI ethicist, we have to think about doing what's right. And so, to separate this really quickly, there's the concept of AI ethics and the ethics of AI. And so, the ethics of AI are, as an emerging technology, is this something that we even want to release on the world? The more fundamental questions about the technology itself. AI ethics has us step into a present and future wherein it's just assumed that AI is deployed because it is. And we really have to begin asking the questions about humanity. How do we protect the fundamental human rights of all those who are participating in this ecosystem? What is right? How do we define those things? And if we know what's right, how do we define clearly what's out of bounds of what's right so that we can take corrective action to ensure that the system in fact produces the behaviors that we want. And so I know that's a bit of a circuitous answer, but I think that's probably the closest way to frame up the focus of
Yeah.
most ethicists.
Yeah. It occurs to me that the ethicist or the ethics piece sort of works hand in glove with the other side. We're talking about organizations and people within the organization, leadership and employees and the teams and so on and so forth.
Yes.
They're being asked to have this growth mindset. They're being asked to deal with some of these challenges, to be more agile and to equip themselves with whatever it takes to be relevant, to be flexible, to continually provide. But the ethics part of it seems to me that in order to get people to buy in to this, people to buy in, it's not just a matter of opportunity at the organization, but the knowledge that the organization is committed to doing the right thing by you and by the
Yes.
right thing in maintaining a balance between the AI, this technology, and the needs and the interests of my workers.
That's exactly right, Charles. That's exactly right. In fact, from the OECD, the Organization on Economic Cooperative Development, a UN member body, the OECD defines the values, the virtues of AI as something wherein we must protect rule of law, democracy, and fundamental human rights. And so, as I think about rolling out these tools, these systems into our organizations, though it might feel misfit to think about those three, those are the three areas that we really have to crystallize or desired outcomes around. Are we going to impair the ability of either our individual people inside the organization or our external stakeholders? Are we going to impair them of their ability to make their own decisions? They're not tied directly to external democracy as we think of from a political perspective. Still, we have to ensure that individuals retain agency in their own decision making. That's a
Right.
very, very real driver and a very, very scary thing if we discount the need and allow these tools to make decisions, material decisions for individuals without their consent.
So much of this, all the conversation I've had, we talk about all these balancing acts. It's really kind of interesting,
Yes,
balancing compliance with, say, innovation
yes,
and balancing the productivity of AI and what AI can do, and of course, the needs of our workers. But actually, to the first one, this comes up time and time again. How do you maintain a balance between keeping people compliant,
hmm
having certain guardrails in place, yet unleashing their creativity? Can these two coexist?
Oh my goodness. And Charles, and I hate to say it this way, but as I hear this question, which we do hear frequently, in my mind, it's a false dichotomy. It just is
100%. 100%.
100%. Yeah. We've talked about playing soccer before, tennis. You're a tennis player.
Yes.
So on the tennis court, you have a net, and then you have end lines and sidelines.
You're pulling the old Robert Frost line on me. Free versus playing tennis without a net. How dare you? I've used that. I can't tell you how many times I've used that. How dare you?
How dare you? But no, the point is that those end lines and sidelines, they tell you when the ball is in play and when the ball is not in play. And
Right.
because of that, you have an opportunity to move as fast as you can possibly move, as long as you know where the bounds are. That's exactly what compliance offers. It offers a
Right.
mechanisms for organizations to know these are our bounds, our operating parameters that we must stay within. Inside those parameters, we can move as fast as we want to move. Outside those parameters, we know that there are potential harms that could befall our stakeholders. So let's not even waste any time over there. So very, very similar. And so I do think that compliance done right, and that's the big caveat, compliance done right is an enabler of innovation, not something that will stymie innovation for organizations.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed. I mean, I'm supposed to withhold my opinions on these podcasts,
No,
but
share.
that comes up so often that
Yes.
sometimes I find myself, no, 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 it is a false choice because they can and they often do coexist. And all great art is produced, or most great art is produced within certain constraints, iambic pentameter, or
Whatever the case may be. Yes.
whatever the case may be, right?
Great examples. In fact, ISO has even created a standard around innovation that they've created their own innovation management system standard in ISO 56001, which is just absolutely incredible. But for the listeners that are familiar with ISO standards, I would encourage you to check out 56001. Um, yeah,
What's the short version of that? That sounds really interesting.
so all ISO management systems are centered around this idea of providing a standard framework for management bodies inside organizations to ask themselves the necessary questions about what they want to create so that they can define their own operating system. And so
Mm.
the short version of 56001 is with all the potential brainstorming and all the infinite variability associated with things that we could do as we think about innovating. Let's give ourselves a structured way of thinking. Let's give ourselves some structured processes that we can use to think so that we can innovate consistently. Which, Charles, again, the ability to produce reliable, consistent outcomes via management systems, in my mind, is just, I mean, it's second to none. It really
Yeah.
is.
No, for sure. The whole idea behind AIX podcast and the Substack newsletter and the community is, we talk about raising your AIQ.
Yes,
And the idea is the idea behind that is that people need to know what questions to ask. Our audience at HR.com, primarily HR people, they need to know what questions to ask. So I'm going to ask you, what
sure.
questions, or is there one question that is not being asked enough when people are evaluating a new AI system or new AI policy?
Absolutely. And that question is, do we need AI? What we see today is really almost a gold rush. We see significant hype around AI, machine learning, automated algorithms, all that. And so we see companies rushing to deploy AI in instances where AI is not necessarily needed. Therefore, um, very much the tail wagging the dog may be the best way to put it. So I think for organizations that are considering evaluating various tools, first of all, step back and think, what are our mission, vision, values? As we think about true governors of our organization, governance is a value creation process, centers around creating desired outcomes at an optimized risk and cost. Three variables. We got it. What do we want? What risk are we willing to take on? And what's our budget for doing this? And so I think organizations many times forget to step back and think about what it is they really want to create and jump straight to the tail, the tail of the
Right.
dog, and begin thinking about the risks and costs associated with implementing this new thing to keep up with the market. So, for those of you listening, please don't do that. Please have
Yes.
a defined business case, a real use for how AI will be an enabler for a process or processes inside your organization. If and when it is, start considering the other things. What do we really want to create? Can AI enable this for us? Then we have to start thinking about the context of our organization. That is, how are we using these AI tools and who are our stakeholders, internal and external? With AI in place, we take on some obligations that we might not have otherwise considered, not just internally, as we talked about our systems and the impact that we'll have on our people, our process, on the technology itself. But externally, we've got stakeholders, we've got influences that we always have to consider relating to customer contracts, relating to external regulation, depending on where you sit or where you operate in the world. And so it becomes a really significant strategic move that I think many organizations, and I hate to say it this way, but many organizations are being a little bit flippant with this decision today.
What about the issue, and this is almost like the other side of that issue, but it's sort of related when you talk about compliance, the problem of stealth AI, just like stealth IT has long been a problem.
Yes.
Stealth AI, everybody sort of bring your own AI to the table thing. How do you deal with that?
Oh my goodness. That's a really good question that I think a lot of organizations are trying to answer today. One thing we will say with, I mentioned ISO management systems. ISO has actually created a management system specific to the AI lifecycle, so AI development and use. It's called ISO 42001. Through it, the management body must regularly review the assets in their environment, changes to their environment. And so, without going too deep, that there is a built-in mechanism to evaluate what's happening inside your environment. And so, I think in many ways, management systems, without explicitly naming a tool to be used, force management to think through those things so that they are consistent. But Charles, to your point, shadow IT. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, with the low code, no code environments, we saw an explosion of shadow IT and shadow development that's led directly to shadow AI that we see today. And people that are on their own, of their own volition, without approval from anyone in the organization, choosing to create AI systems, particularly with the ability to create agents that we see today with tools like N8N. It really is becoming more and more of a concern
Mm.
that there aren't direct answers to as of yet.
Yeah, by the way, I use the term stealth AI, but yes, shadow AI. No, it's a real dilemma. It's a real problem.
It really is.
We have this segment we call bag check. I think it's an appropriate time for us to bring this up. And I ask guests, what do you go to AI tools?
Goodness, I love NADM. And this is going to be probably an answer that you don't get a lot. So working with my children, Amazon actually has an online platform called Party Rock. We're in with no experience, no technical know-how, no technical knowledge whatsoever. You can create your own chat interfaces to some of their platforms, some of their tools. And so with my kids, I've become really fond of Party Rock. My youngest, in fact, when Wicked came out to the theaters,
Right.
she created a chat bot that would respond in the voice of Glinda the Good Witch,
Oh,
which
wow.
was just absolutely phenomenal. Yeah, so those two I think are probably top of mind. And then Charles, frankly, For me, my focus tends to be more on the standards than than necessarily the technology that's being deployed, only because there's so little education in the market right now about what the standards are and how the standards can truly benefit business.
By the
You
way,
know,
you mentioned coding and so forth. I do want to have somebody on to talk about vibe coding, this new thing, which I want to kick the tires on. That sounds. I remember some years ago, yeah, there were some these no code platforms. MIT had such a platform, and they weren't always that easy. You got around having to code. You have these sort of these blocks of logic, and you put them all together and build these apps and so on and so forth. But this vibe coding sounds like an
yeah.
order, several orders of magnitude easy. You just say, hey, chat GPT, whatever it is, or whatever you're using, whatever, I know there are several out there. I want to build this, that, and the other, and voila. Any final thoughts on, where this is all heading, AI compliance? Are you optimistic? What's your general mindset as far as where this is all headed?
So I'm ever an optimist. I mean, I am very optimistic that as a species, we'll ultimately make the right decisions that help us grow. But I mean, there's no way around the fact that it's a very, very tumultuous time, may be the best way to put it, from a standards perspective. I mean, I mentioned ISO 42001, it as an internationally recognized standard for responsible development and use of AI. It's a singular entry in the field. It is the only management system like it that offers organizations an ability to implement responsible governance of AI, but then also have it certified so that they can offer assurance and trust to their value chains. What we see is globally with all of the regulation that continues to emerge, and these things are like bubbles, Charles. It's like a new regulation just pops up every day. What we see is that there's very little consensus about how to enforce the expected regulation. And so therefore there's lots and lots of confusion in the market today. And frankly, organizations don't know what to do because they know that they have a burden, they know they have an obligation, but there isn't a clear path forward for ensuring that they're conforming to that burden or external obligation. And so what I think we'll see is things will get worse before they get better as it
Yeah.
relates to companies saying, hey, Kelly McGonigal, she wrote a book about willpower several years ago, and she references this concept that she calls the what the hell effect. And that is, as humans, we can only take on so much before ultimately we say, what the hell? And just kind of do what we want to do, regardless of the consequences. Yeah, I think in many ways, organizations, businesses today, because of the unknown, have kind of hit the phase where they're in the what the hell effect. We're going to do it. We're going to be opportunistic. We're going to see what happens. And so I think the consequences of those decisions are going to take some time to clean up. But I do see a path forward. I honestly do.
Well, that's encouraging. Do you follow the NBA? You like watching basketball at all?
Some, yeah,
Some, well, they have this term, a guy's going downhill when a guy gathers a head of steam coming across the half court line. So much of this feels like AI. It's just, we're all, downstream from that. And it's just coming so fast and it's all sort of a moving target. So standards in such a fluid environment has to be very, very difficult. Every day it seems that we have a new development and one large language model leapfrogs the next. It's yeah, you talk about the Wild West is an easy overused metaphor, but
it
it's
is.
not inapt.
And Charles, you mentioned the NBA. I think that's a great analogy because what we see are a philosophy of two different eras in AI right now. In the 80s and 90s, Detroit had the bad boys. In the 80s and 90s, we had an NBA that was very much centered around very physical defense and stopping the offense from scoring at any cost. It was sanctioned, it was legitimized. That's what pro basketball was. That's very much the philosophy that we see coming out of the EU, wherein we're going to focus on consumer protections first. You big technology companies, you need to slow down because we need to be sure that what you're developing and deploying is actually safe for humans before you deploy it. What we see in the US today, however, is the NBA of today, which is centered around the offense scoring as much as they can possibly score and penalizing the defenses for being physical and trying to slow the pace of the game. So it really is. It really is an interesting time, Charles.
You just created the soundbite for this episode. That was really well done.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Patrick.
No, thank you.
Very adroit. Anyway, Patrick, I really do appreciate you spent the time. I've been looking forward to this, and it's a conversation that I've not had before. This whole idea of a systems-oriented approach to AI, and I was glad we had an opportunity to unpack this.
Charles, thank you so much. Thanks for being patient and ensuring that
Of
we actually had this dialogue.
of course, now that you broke the ice, we have to have you back a little bit down the road. So.
Anytime. Anytime it makes sense.
Patrick, thanks so much.
Thank you,
Today, I
Charles.
spoke with Patrick Sullivan, VP of Strategy and Innovation at A-LIGN, a leading provider of cybersecurity and compliance solutions. Patrick has over 25 years experience in the IT security and compliance industry. He's been a TEDx speaker, and I am sure going forward will continue to be a TEDx speaker. He is a member of the Forbes Technology Council and an AI ethicist. He joined us today from his headquarters in Knoxville, Tennessee. This is Charles Epstein for the X Factor podcast. Thanks for listening.